This was quite the day. I think this is going to be one of the more significant days that we look back on. On Friday, certainly that was a big story dropping, but I think on Friday, and you correct me if you feel differently, I think that people still left with the idea that is the door closed on Vince McMahon ever returning? Whereas today, it felt like that door was shut. And tonight's Raw, while it didn't surprise me, it was surreal that here is an entire show. And while we got one veiled reference to him, the name Vince McMahon was never said on television. We are in a WWE environment where Vince McMahon does not exist any longer on air.
At least for now.
For now, but I do believe that this is I really cannot see him ever back in a power position. Being honored at some point down the road, you can speculate that where things change. As we have seen, there have been many figures that have faced grand scrutiny, and as time elapses, people forget or just put that aside. But in terms of Vince McMahon ever being near the figure that he once was, I think that is all going to be in the past tense.
Perhaps, yeah. I mean, I think in terms of his name being a hot button issue right now for the company, we might be experiencing. Well, I can't even fully say it because new things might come out, but at least it feels like that's a peak right now. Where I don't think the on-air product wants to, be associated with the terrible headlines that are out there right now. But
they did it on Friday, way. It was like all of these allegations and these NDAs were out there of what he was accused of, but it was the money that was ultimately the downfall here of this person who got a lionized tribute on Friday, and not even a mention of, if you were to tell me that there will come the day that Vince McMahon steps away and on the preceding Monday Night Raw, his leaving the company will not even be mentioned.
Yeah, true. I mean, over the weekend, I feel like there have been even more headlines, since Friday. Certainly today, this was not a show where they were trying to control the headlines and to make their own, sort of version of the story by manipulating the crowd into a "Thank you, Vince" chant.
No,
nothing like that at all.
I think they want to run from. They do not want to be attached to the name Vince McMahon, and I don't think that is an error by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, that was just what tonight's show was. Now, this was not a Raw that I would say. I would imagine this is going to do a very good number tonight with a lot of lapsed fans coming back out of sheer curiosity whenever you see a big shakeup like this. And there's a new, we saw it years ago when Heyman and Bischoff were installed into those roles. And that was still underneath. It was a Vince McMahon show, but you generate that curiosity out of your fan base. I think that was heightened tonight to tune in. And what you got was a show that was still largely put together by, the outgoing sensibilities, I would say. One source had told me that, this show had largely been put together prior to the changes, maybe some minor tweaks. But what we saw tonight was if you were not aware of the news, this was a standard Raw. I would say in terms of a go-home show for SummerSlam, even disappointing in that sense of selling you on the show.
Yeah, that's right. In these sort of regime changes, I imagine part of the challenge is to simply have the show take place and have it seem like there's nothing wrong. So I wasn't personally expecting anything major shifting right away. If there is going to be any sort of tonal shift, I think we'll see it in the weeks and months to come. But today, I'm sure for the people in the back, it was simply about, maybe getting everything in order just so that they could even present a show.
And I understand that. You do have SummerSlam on Saturday. I would not be advocating for a show where you come in and blow everything up and do something crazy. At the same time, I do think from a public strategy standpoint, you would want your audience to come out of this show, I think, energized and focused on what's coming next, as opposed to still looking at what has just happened with the outgoing Vince McMahon. And I would imagine your audience watching this show, they're still looking backward as this company is attempting to move forward.
Yeah, that's true, perhaps. I think, they'd be better off perhaps getting through SummerSlam and then maybe even as soon as next Monday, figuring out what the new direction is under a new regime. All this buzz about potentially USA wanting a what is it, PG-14? What is the rating here?
TV 14.
TV 14 rating. That seems to be very well timed to coincide with a brand new shift, a brand new, perhaps look for the show, and it needs to be something that I think is of a more concerted effort to tell and announce to the audience that you're going to get something different rather than just maybe something a bit more quickly put together.
Right. The Paul Levesque creative era is not going to be defined in one show. It's not going to be defined in a month of shows. It is going to be a process that we look back months, a year from now, and see some of the small and the philosophical changes that this show is embedded with, or not. What elements of the past will they still cling to? You have to remember, this is still a culture that has known one way of presenting professional wrestling for their entire careers. If they have been in this system, that different ways have kind of been, that's the wrong way of doing things, or it's just you're not aware of other ways. This is just embedded in us that two guys are wrestling, a contract needs to be signed. We need a face-to-face and multiple rematches after. It's all of these things that will be under a spotlight, but that's not going to be evident immediately. This is a long-term change, assuming that Paul Levesque is going to be in this role for years to come. And what Absolutely. His vision will be, as opposed to like NXT, where we saw like what that vision was and how that translates when you are broadcasting to 2 million people on Monday nights instead of, the high six figures.
SummerSlam is set to be the culmination of several storylines, and you're not just going to come in at the end of a storyline and somehow change things to fit your vision. You have to see the story through. You have to see the characters through, and what we're presented with this week is still very much, the remnants of what was already set before.
So a few news items to get to before we go through Raw is that the Wall Street Journal has another report out today stating that the SEC and federal inquiries into Vince McMahon's hush money payments sped up McMahon's decision to step down after launching investigation. So this was sort of alluded to in the 8K about potential investigations and regulatory issues that they have faced and could be facing more of. So this is more so just identifying what kind of pressure points Vince McMahon and the company were facing and will still continue to face. It is not as though Vince McMahon stepping away erases any of this. So this is an ongoing story, and what kind of penalties the company and Vince McMahon could be facing on top of everything else.
Absolutely, yeah. As time goes on, I feel like we'll get that much more clarity about all of this, and it's not just the board of investigators hired. The board of directors hired investigators that are on the case now.
Well, it's the board of directors that they had hired out a firm that is still continuing the investigation, of which we await the results of and the findings and how those will be presented. I would think the company is in a position right now where they are encouraged to be transparent with as much of the findings of that investigation as possible, that they would want to present sort of a clean slate here to your public, and what the reaction is going to be of your shareholders to all of this. Like, there are many different masters to answer to in the wake of all of this, and the SEC breathing down your back is not going to be ideal in any scenario.
No, not at all.
According to Fightful, Paul Levesque did hold a meeting with talent prior to Raw, and from the notes in their reporting was Levesque just giving a message of promising transparency, open lines of communication, and wanting work to be fun. So it seemed to be kind of just a rallying the troops kind of speech, but also with a nod that, things can be improved based on the work environment that these people were part of, that, he wants to change, and sort of a change amongst just the open lines of communication between, talent and those that oversee them.
Sure. Yeah. I'm sure it's a move that a lot of people will be happy with. Maybe some people who were Vince's chosen ones might not be as happy, but this is a locker room full of a lot of talents that have gone through a Paul Levesque led NXT, and I imagine a good chunk of them would be ecstatic about this.
What are your feelings on Paul Levesque having the dual role of overseeing all the creative responsibilities and juggling being the head of talent relations? Those are two complete full-time jobs that he is balancing.
This was what Bruce Pritchard was doing, wasn't it?
For a few weeks, yes.
For an interim, at least, yeah. Again, we're talking about somebody who we didn't think was going to come back at all due to health reasons. And even one of those jobs, I would say half of one of those jobs is probably stressful enough for the average person. So for somebody like him with already his health issues, how long will he have a position like this? So much of it right now, I think the announcements of him being employed in both of those roles is maybe some level of PR, maybe some level of assurance that, hey, here's a guy who's already done this job. He's been in our system for a long, long time. Trust that he can do this, and don't go selling that stock right away. How I imagine he might be instituting some form of team that, I mean, there's already a team there, but is he going to be shuffling that roster around, maybe bringing on some of his own guys? I have to think that he's keeping his health a priority as well and not overexerting himself.
Yeah. To me, it's concerning in the sense that this is an incredibly stressful job. In talent relations, like, it's a very, very small group that have held this role in the company's history. When you go back to J.J. Dillon and Jim Ross and John Laurinaitis and Paul Levesque, like, it's a very small group. Like, they have had, a talent relations department, but in terms of the heads, like, it's very few people and who they had that confidence in putting in there. It's also the idea of being the head of creative and the head of talent relations. Like, do you want that to be the same person? Like, if you have an issue, let's just bring up, like, Sasha Banks and Naomi. If you replay that and they have an issue with something presented to them, who is your go-to person? The head of creative is also the head of talent relations. Do you want the same person having kind of that vacuum of power that you don't have somebody else that you can have on that department? It's sort of, all on one person.
But historically in professional wrestling, have those two roles been different? I mean, when we look at maybe wrestling on a much smaller scale, and even historically, I mean, you really just have the booker who's in charge of booking the talent, who's in charge of writing the storylines, who's in charge of, handling any sort of criticisms or pay of the talent. This is obviously a much bigger company with on the biggest scale. But is it simply a way to get back to basics to make things more efficient?
I look at it that this is a role to me that is a complete full-time job that I would just think, like, how many people did they have ready to install into a position like that? When John Laurinaitis was put on, his hiatus, however you want to determine it, the go-to was Bruce Pritchard. Like, it just seems it's a very small club of who they have that faith in to task with those kinds of duties in an interim basis, or in this position, a permanent one in Paul Levesque, who very hard to have envisioned this 6 months ago, that here is the guy that has a great amount of power at this point. He is the number 3 person in the company.
Certainly. Yeah. I guess, depending on the metric, yeah, I suppose you could say number 3, but at least public facing, I mean, he feels like he's, a bigger deal than Nick Khan is. So maybe even number 1, maybe even above Stephanie when you're talking about, in terms of like how much control he has over the overall product and the talent and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, I would think that maybe this is him just kind of taking over the reins and instituting his own systems before, rather than somebody who's, it remains to be seen, like, how in control will he be? How much of a control freak will he be versus what a Vince McMahon was? And again, considering his health and his added responsibilities, I hope he's leaning on other people a bit more.
It will be fascinating to look at all of these people in their different roles. Like, they have, as long as they've been in this company, it has always been that no matter how high you are, you answer to one person, and that one person is gone. Paul Levesque does not have to, massage anything. He does not have to, acquiesce to anybody. I mean, he is the final stamp when it comes to the creative process. Nick Khan, every single interview when it's brought up, he would always say, I report to Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon runs this company. Well, now you are co-CEO of this company. I think Nick Khan's importance, whatever you wanted to value it at, it is that much more today as the person that is so central to every one of their business dealings. And when you're seeing the reaction of the stock today with, added optimism of a sale, he is going to be that point person when it comes to the television negotiations, which very much could be tied in with talks of a sale. He is your point person there. And that is someone that I would say, with Vince McMahon gone, like, if you could classify anyone as invaluable to the success of your company, Nick Khan to me is number one.
Sure.
The stock itself today, it opened, it was up 8% today since it's open. It closed Friday at $66.25, and today closing at $71.81. So this was hardly, any kind of revolt from shareholders when it came to this chaotic news. We only have to go back 2.5 years when George Barrios and Michelle Wilson left the company as co-presidents, and the stock tanked after that loss, which was coupled with the fact that they really did not have a concerted plan. It was very abrupt. And, in hindsight, it was the right move. And this was actually a point in Vince McMahon's favor. It was believed one of the big philosophical differences was, the direction of the WWE network, and who ultimately came in as the new president of the company. It was Nick Khan. So in the long run, that was a move that did play out well for WWE. But, that was always the thought for years and years of Vince McMahon not being with this company. How would the stock react? And it seems that it was certainly offset, if not boosted. In fact, it was boosted by the fact that it seems like there is a lot of focus on a sale now, and the general sentiment of when, not if. So who's going to buy this one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this to me was a little. Who's going to buy it? I have no idea. I'll maybe we'll gather a group around, and maybe we'll try to shop it for it ourselves. Yeah. This was certainly a bit of a surprise, I think, to a lot of us, but we would have had no way of knowing, how people would have reacted to Vince McMahon ultimately leaving this company. In this short term, the stock market seems to be reacting most on the potential of a sale, but I don't know how they're going to react. Let's say, by the time the next earnings call comes out, whether or not this sort of optimism or maybe speculation is sustained. When is the next earnings call?
So they haven't announced, part of today's 8K filing was announcing the fact that the financial statements for this last quarter have not been completed yet. They are redoing their financial statements going back to 2019. So that's kind of put off. Usually it would be the first week of August, but you would get the announcement by now of when that call would be. So it's still to be determined when that call will be. And obviously there's going to be heightened interest in that call, just given all of this involved. But, as well, working in their favor is that we saw this in the lead up to the 2014 television negotiations, and again in the lead up to the announcement in 2018 when they signed the renewal with NBC Universal and the deal with Fox. Was the anticipation of those rights deals going up led to the stock just climbing and climbing. So I do believe that over this next year is when the big negotiations are going to be begin, and you would estimate like next spring, that would coincide with the last time that the announcement was made, around 18 months before the rights were up. So, I would say that there's going to be a lot of interest. Like you saw several analysts today, increasing their optimism on the WWE stock as well, that there just looks to be, no panic at all, quite the opposite. And in the bizarre irony of all things, Vince McMahon remains the biggest shareholder. So his day was not all bad, because on paper he had an enormous increase today because of the stock increase.
Well, when you're already rich, what does being even more rich necessarily mean? You know, unless he has some sort of exit strategy or transitional strategy where he might look to maybe sell to get into a different business, perhaps. But at 77, is he even considering something like that? To me, like, this is still an overall, major loss for him. He's losing his day to day. He's losing his what seemed to be for a long, from the outside looking in, one of his primary reasons for existing is to play in his sandbox. He's lost his toys. He's lost the rights to the sandbox to somebody else now, and it wasn't his choice. So I don't know if any amount of money to him is making him feel that much better.
Yeah, I feel that when all this blows over, the focus of like a next chapter for a Vince McMahon, will that option be available to him? What will he want to do? I think people are just going to purely be guessing because he has never been in anywhere near this position in his entire adult life where he does not have an outlet for work.
And on top of that, his name is not good right now. Who's going to want to work with him next?
He is leaving the company he is going to forever be associated with, and he's leaving disgraced.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And this follows like the XFL debacle 2 years ago. So, I mean, and how much will he believe that will he be satisfied with this being the final chapter on his legacy as well? It's the lowest one of his career. So that's another one to follow.